It's the internet. You're busy. Let's do this. I'm Jeff Grubb and I write for GamesBeat.com. Let's review the Xbox Series S. This is a $300 next gen Xbox from Microsoft. It is launching November 10th alongside the $500 Xbox Series X. And like how the Xbox Series X is a follow-up to the One X, the Xbox Series S is a follow-up to the One S. It's confusing because of the names, but it's not really confusing if you think about it for even a moment. It just kind of makes sense with what they've done with their branding so far. For this review, I'm not going to go over the features one by one. Instead, I'm going to pose a series of questions that I had about the Series S, and I think that as we answer them, as we look at the Series S throughout this video, you and I will understand what this console is going for and whether or not it succeeds at that goal. So, what is the purpose of the Xbox Series S? With the Xbox Series S, Microsoft is making a bet that a lot of people who prioritize value over horsepower still want access to next-gen games. It's like the iPhone SE or the iPhone Mini or the Google Pixel 4a. These are like $400, $450, $350 versions of smartphones that have like their cutting edge $600 to $1,400 models out there. But the idea is that even the iPhone Mini or the Google Pixel 4a pretty much does everything. They do everything that their bigger brothers do, just with a few compromises. That's what the Xbox Series S is. It's a more affordable option that can still basically do everything that its more expensive sibling can do. It just, has some compromises. It has the same type of speedy storage, but there's less of it. It has the same CPU, but it's slightly downclocked, just a tad. And it has the same RDNA 2 GPU architecture from AMD, but it's a smaller GPU. It's in its overall, it's slower, meant for 1080p, maybe 1440p instead of 4K. Everything else, however, should be the same, or at least that is how Microsoft is pitching it. So the next question, does the purpose of the Xbox Series S line up with the needs of any potential customers? So we know what the Xbox Series S is, right? It's the console equivalent of an iPhone Mini. But is there an audience out there for such a console? And if we take Microsoft's claims at face value, we have to ask if someone is willing to give up 4K to save $200. And my guess is that you and I probably wouldn't. You and I are probably not going to just try to save $200 and not have the most powerful option because we care about that stuff and we're deeply invested in gaming. I write about games for a living. You are watching this video. We're just going to spend that money, right? But what about like a young family that wants to get a console for their kids and then maybe use it as a media device? Or what about, if you have a kid and like they play Roblox with their friends and you want to give them an easy way to do that, that again, maybe works really well as a media device. And also if you find that they want to get into a bunch of other games, you have some service options that make that really affordable compared to buying $60, $70 games. Or how about your brother who likes games and has liked games in the past, but does not like them as much as you, but wants to play with you and is willing to go out and buy a console, but also doesn't like the idea of spending $500. Well, maybe saving $200 there makes a lot more sense. For so many people, saving that $200 to have a cheaper alternative to getting into a console makes a lot of sense. That is, as long as you are willing to give up some of the features. So we've talked about giving up 4K. Next question, do you have to give up anything else? And I think it's too early to know if Series S is really just a lower resolution Series X. I think that is what Microsoft intends us to believe. But we're already seeing exceptions. Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition on Xbox Series X, that has ray tracing. On Series S, it doesn't. And Series S games that, are the counterpart of the Series X, they're supposed to have ray tracing, but this one version doesn't already. Another thing to consider is that backward compatibility is also not quite as nice on the Xbox Series S as it is on the Series X. This system is it runs the Xbox One S versions of those games. And if you think about it, the Xbox One X versions are the ones that got like all the extra graphical options. So you got a game and you put it in an Xbox One or Xbox One S, it would just usually just give you, a brightness option in the settings and nothing like, oh, do you want to prefer frame rate or would you like to improve the fidelity? On the Xbox One X, you did get those options. But if you're running the Xbox One S version on the Series S, you aren't going to get the One X options there. And so a game like Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, that runs at 60 frames per second on Series X in performance mode. There is no performance mode in the One S version, so even if the Series S could run the game faster, the option isn't there to do it. From Software would have to go back and actually update the game to make that happen. Here's another big question. Is there enough space on the Series S? It is a 500 gigabyte SSD internally, and that's already half the size of the Series X, which has a 1 terabyte SSD. And it's the same kind of NVMe PCIe 4 SSD. But then you have to consider there's the OS, and there is like a partition for quick resume and for saving videos and screenshots. That's going to leave you with just 364 gigabytes of usable space for games and apps. And I want to say that this isn't like a tragedy for the kind of people that would be getting a Series S, right? These are the kinds of people that are going to play a game here or there. Except Game Pass does exist, and Game Pass makes people want to try more games than ever. And that will be a problem with only 364 gigabytes. I think I have like 2 games installed on the hard drive or on the SSD right now, and already this thing is about half full. That is, I mean, they're big games, of course, but I think it's going to be a problem for some people. And of course, the option for expanding this right now is a $220 Seagate expansion card that doesn't make a lot of sense for a console that only costs $300. But maybe those prices will come down over time, and I think this is going to be a headache. I don't know. I don't know if it's a deal breaker though. It's just kind of the kind of thing where you're going to have to be picky and choosy, and you have to shuffle things around. And of course, you could store any game on an external drive, but if it's a game optimized for the One S, you will not be able to load it up from an external USB hard drive. You will have to put it back on the internal storage. Okay, I get it. You're probably asking something like, why does it have a smaller storage drive if it also doesn't have a disk drive? So the Xbox Series S is a digital-only console. Obviously, games on discs are also digital, but that just means you can't use physical media like an Ultra Blu-ray disc. You can't just pop that in here. There is no drive in this. So wouldn't that mean you would want a bigger storage drive, right? Because you don't have the discs. Well, keep in mind that since the beginning of the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 generation, every game on disc is immediately installed on your internal drive. So even if you have a disc, you're still installing it inside your system, and then the disc basically just acts as the license, so you can actually start up the game. Now, of course, even in that case, like a disc acts as like a local backup, right? That way you don't have to like worry about getting online, and maybe that's important to you if you have bad internet. And I would just say that if you have bad internet, the Xbox Series S is not for you. I think it's very clearly that's the case. It is for people who are well connected and like are used to like streaming everything from the cloud. And of course, you're not streaming from the cloud with the Xbox Series S, but you're downloading a lot of data from the cloud. And there's a lot of people that applies to. A lot of people who get all of their media over the internet instead of through physical media these days. So it makes sense for some. But if you are a person who's like, oh, I have bad internet, you're going to have to kind of bite the bullet and buy the versions of these consoles that actually do have a disk drive. And that's just the way it is. Okay, so you have less space. Are the games smaller on the Series S than they are on the Series X? And I don't know. It's hard to tell. We're still early days. But it doesn't seem like games are going to shrink that much from the Series X down to the Series S. They haven't so far. Most of the optimized games I've looked at are the same size on the Series X compared to the Series S. And I had hoped that the Series S versions would take up significantly less space, but most of the time they take up the same amount of space. Maybe compression will come along and make things better, but no one has found a way to make the 250 gigabyte Call of Duty installation only require 100 gigabytes. If they could make that happen, they would have done it by now. So maybe it's coming, but I wouldn't count on that. If you are worried about storage space, yeah, be worried about it. There's not a lot here. But even if things aren't getting better in terms of storage size and how much file sizes are ballooning on consoles and PC, it actually doesn't seem like it's going to get much worse going forward. I think we've hit that plateau. We've sort of flattened out after years of bigger and bigger games. I think that I don't expect them to get that much bigger now that we're on a new generation. It's not like, oh, this is a problem and it's going to get worse. It's the same problem we've been dealing with on the console so far. I guess with the exception that you probably have a 1 terabyte system and this is only 500 gigabytes. Okay, enough about storage and all that stuff. How do games actually run on the Xbox Series S? I tried to answer already what the Xbox Series S sort of takes away, but what are you getting from the Xbox Series S when you actually play games? And most games seem to run as advertised. Microsoft says the Xbox Series S does resolutions of up to 1440p, but that should mean that games actually run at around 1080p is my guess. This is a 1080p console. 1440p would be nice, and some games will hit it. I think any sort of like esports game or competitive game, I think maybe Rocket League might hit it or Fortnite or something like that. But most of the time you're going to get 1080p, and hopefully you get 1080p 60, especially if the Xbox Series X is doing some form of like 4K 60 or close to 4K and 60 frames per second. Now, 1080p 60 on Series S is something I am seeing a lot. Sea of Thieves is a good example. That's an optimized game now after an update, and it runs at 1080p 60 on the Series S, and it is significantly better than the 30 frames you get out of One X or One S. And yeah, I think so far I'm pretty sure other optimized games are delivering pretty similar results. But again, it's early. It's still early, and nothing is working with ray tracing yet. And that seems like it's proving troublesome for Series X, let alone for the Series S. So the only thing we know for sure is Devil May Cry 5 isn't going to have ray tracing on the Series S. What is Watch Dogs going to be like? Watch Dogs Legion, which is a game that's supposed to have it. We'll have to see. I think that's going to start working here in a couple of days. Maybe there will be some other examples soon, but it's just impossible to say right now. We'll have to continue examining the console. We'll have to wait and see. So next question, is the Xbox Series S going to last? I think this is an interesting one because I think it's easy to imagine that the Xbox Series S is going to only last like 2 years and then you'll have to buy something to replace it, because the Xbox One and the PS4 kind of lasted for like what, 3, 4, 5 years before they needed like their Pro or One X upgrades. And if we're starting here where it's like, oh, this is already a cheaper console, maybe it'll last even not even as long as those consoles. I'm skeptical of that. I think that I think it's very likely that this Series S could last 4 to 5 years without feeling old. Kind of no problem. A big reason for that is developers don't need that much more horsepower than they're getting from the Series S to do 1080p and 60 frames per second. Especially since this has that modern Ryzen CPU that is going to keep pace with gaming for the next 5, 6, 7 years. Now, maybe ray tracing is actually too much for the Series S, or developers, instead of spending time optimizing the Series S version, they just cut that game down significantly and focus on the Series X version and PC and PlayStation 5 and all that. That's possible, but I think even at the worst, I think that's only going to be an occasional problem with the occasional, like, really big cutting-edge visual release. Most of the time, for most people, in most games, it's going to handle, the Fortnites and the next big multiplayer release just fine, because those games tend to be made for a really wide hardware base where it needs to run on really slow PCs because they want it to run on like, in PC bangs in Asia and stuff like that, and they don't want to like count anyone out. And that's kind of where multiplayer gaming is heading. Free to play, as many people as possible, needs to be able to run on a smartphone. So if that's like your focus, if you are getting this to like play with your siblings or whatever, and this is your way of keeping in touch with them, this system should continue to be just fine for those kinds of games for years without any problems at all. But another thing to keep in mind here is Microsoft's business model. Now, you can pay the total upfront cost for a Series S, $300, if you want. But the company's also offering something called Xbox All Access, which for $25 a month, you get an Xbox One S to own. It's yours. And you also get 2 years of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. And you have to pay that $25 a month for the 2-year period. Now, that's a good deal. I think that is you actually end up saving money on the total cost of the console. It's a good deal. But what happens after that 2 years, right? So maybe some big name games come out like right around the 2-year period that when people's 2-year subscription to Game Pass lapses, and that makes people want to come back and get Game Pass because they spent all that money on the One S. They might as well come back and continue playing those games now that they're starting to come out. That's possible. I think there's another possibility where, games are just sort of coming out pretty regularly anyhow. And what Microsoft really needs to do to ensure that people stay on that treadmill of paying a monthly fee is they release updated hardware, kind of like a phone, kind of like a smartphone, where once a person has paid off their current device, there is something right there waiting for them that makes their current device feel old and outdated, and it is, deliberate forced obsolescence. And the idea is, okay, now we're going to get them right back on the treadmill. They're going to keep paying us a monthly fee. That's also possible. We'll see. I think it's going to be kind of hard to transition console gaming into that model, but it feels like that's where we're headed. We'll see if that's actually how it goes. Next question. What else should you know about the Xbox Series S? Like the Series X, the S is a really great media box. It's something that I'm really happy with when using both the X and the S is if you consume a lot of Netflix and Prime Video or now even Apple TV Plus, these apps work really well on these consoles. The experience of using these apps is it's like speedy and smooth. And if you are accustomed to accessing these apps through like a smart TV or an Xbox One or PlayStation 4, which I think a lot of people do, the Series S is a significantly better experience than most smart TVs and the Xbox One or PlayStation 4. That's thanks to the very powerful CPU and the very fast SSD. Now, if you view the Series S as a media box and a console, like it's these two things, which, Microsoft hasn't really tried to sell it that way for specific reasons of it's like trying to do that in the past and it going very bad for them. But if you try to view it as both these things, it really flips the value proposition in my head. And Apple TV is $150. The NVIDIA Shield is $200. And these are really great media boxes. I think I really like the NVIDIA Shield. But those aren't also full-blown consoles like the Series S is. And so the Series S at $300, especially with support for like prized AV standards, Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, this is starting to feel like a really good deal. Like you're getting a lot out of it. If you have a TV that especially if you have a TV that kids use, or that, if you ever have guests over ever again, if like they come over and you want to have something for them to watch at night when they're going to bed, while you're like cleaning up the house or whatever, the Series S is like a perfect media box for that. It's small, it's digital, you don't have to worry about discs. It's going to have all the apps that most people are going to want. It can play games if that's what people are more interested in. And it's affordable at $300 when you think about the cost of a console plus the cost of like a really good set-top box, which you shouldn't have to do that anymore because these consoles are finally really fast enough to handle the media experience. And personally, I don't miss the Blu-ray drive on the Series S because it is the kind of thing that I think I would want to put somewhere with kids, and I don't want them touching discs. They're bad at discs. I don't know if you know this about kids. They're bad at discs. Also, unlike the Series X, the Series S is small enough that it can fit in any entertainment cabinet. This thing is tiny. I'm having a really easy time picking this up. It'll slide right in there. I mean, it's dense, but it fits really nice on its side. I think it looks really, really great on its side. Hopefully I'll have some footage of what it looks like, you know, without it being attached there and me putting it right up to the camera. But, you know, the size, you know, it's a problem with the One X. It's a problem with the PlayStation 5. And if you are someone who does use their console to watch more TV than to play games, maybe spending a little less money to get something that's going to fit into your entertainment center is kind of worth it. Now, I think you might be worried about the drawbacks. Oh, it's smaller. Does the fan get louder? No real drawbacks with the smaller size. This big grate here, the big black, you know, circle that they have here, it seems to be pushing out a ton of air, enough air that it, you know, without having to spin up the fan really fast. And like the Series X, I haven't really noticed any sound coming from the Series S. It's really quiet. All right, let's finish up with the big question. Should you get an Xbox Series S? And that's going to depend on when you are watching this. If you are checking in on this review on launch day because you're someone who is actually deeply invested in gaming and you just want to know what's going on with the Series S, and maybe you'll get it if it's really good and it's for you, it's not for you. It's not. It is the shrunk down version of the Series X, and you are someone who wants the full fat experience of the real console, and spending $200 to get that is going to be worth it to you and to me. Now, if you found this review months from now, years from now, you know, it's 2022, 2023 or whatever, and you just want a box that can handle media apps and is a good way to play video games with your friends, and you don't spend every day like looking at comparison videos of like, you know, what a game looks like at 1080p versus 4K, you're not going to really notice the downgrades. You probably wouldn't even know where to begin to look for those downgrades. And for you, spending $500 to get the full fat experience actually makes very little sense. Instead, get the Series S, save that money. You'll have a console that is fully capable of enabling you to play with your friends, enabling you to play all the big new releases, and maybe they're not the best, but I don't think you're going to be in any situation where they are running at like 15 frames per second. I don't think that's going to happen. And that's when you would notice. That is the Xbox Series S. That's it for me. I'm going to get out of here. It's a good console for who it's made for, I think. I think if you heard about the Series S, you're like, that's not for me. I'm not really interested in that. You're almost certainly correct about that. And if you're someone who's like, well, maybe I'll get the Series S, because I haven't even bought a 4K TV yet. But if you play games every day and that's like your main hobby, really, really think about it. It might be a better investment to go with the Series X at that point, or a PlayStation 5. Maybe a PlayStation 5 digital at $400. We'll have to see. But that does it for this video. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I'm gonna get out of here. It's getting late. Yeah. So until next time, take care of yourself. Have a good one, and goodbye.